a gorgeous young Michigan mother, Lynette Hooker, falls overboard in the Bahamas, according to her husband, who managed to paddle ashore to safety.
The ocean has a way of hiding secrets. By day, it sparkles with promise, stretching endlessly under the sun like a dream waiting to be lived. But at night, it becomes something else entirely. Dark, unpredictable, and unforgiving. And somewhere in those waters, a woman vanished without a trace. Lynette Hooker was not just anyone. She was a mother, a woman who had built a life that many people only dream of. Alongside her husband, Brian, she had traded the ordinary for something extraordinary. They lived on a yacht, sailing from place to place, documenting their journey, sharing moments of freedom, adventure, and what seemed like pure happiness. From Texas to Florida, and eventually to the Bahamas, their life looked like a picture-perfect escape from reality. But sometimes, the most beautiful pictures hide the darkest truths. On a quiet Saturday night in the Bahamas, Lynette and Brian went out to dinner in a small island town called Hopetown. It wasn't unusual. This was part of their routine. They would anchor their yacht offshore and use a small dinghy, a modest motorized boat, to travel short distances, like going into town for supplies, laundry, or a meal. That night seemed no different. They had dinner, just like any other couple enjoying life on the water. Around 7:30 p.m., they left the restaurant. The sun had already begun to set, and darkness was slowly taking over the horizon. The plan was simple: get back into the dinghy, cross the water, and return to their yacht where they would spend the night. But according to Brian, something went terribly wrong. He claims that while they were on their way back, the waters became rough. Somewhere between Hopetown and their yacht, Lynette fell overboard. One moment she was there, the next, gone. And if that wasn't alarming enough, there was something else. Brian said Lynette had the kill switch lanyard. Now this might sound like a small detail, but it's anything but. The kill switch is a safety device attached to the driver of the boat. If the driver falls into the water, the lanyard pulls free and immediately shuts off the engine, preventing the boat from speeding away uncontrolled. It's a critical safety feature, and it's almost always worn by the person operating the boat. So why did Lynette have it? According to her daughter, Brian was always the one who drove the dinghy. Always. Which raises a troubling question. Why was Lynette the one connected to the kill switch that night? Brian says when Lynette fell into the water, the engine stopped. He claims he tried to help, even throwing a flotation device toward her. But then something even harder to understand happened. He didn't go after her. Instead of paddling toward Lynette, instead of trying to pull her back into the boat, Brian says he began paddling away, toward shore, alone. Think about that for a second. A woman falls into open water at night, in rough conditions, and her husband, her only immediate help, chooses not to go toward her, but away from her. Brian would later say that he paddled for hours, from the time Lynette allegedly fell overboard around 7:30 p.m. He didn't reach shore until nearly 4 a.m. That's an entire night spent drifting and paddling across open water. And Lynette? She was left behind in the darkness. What makes this even more unsettling is what happened next. After finally reaching shore, Brian reported Lynette missing. Authorities were alerted, and a search began almost immediately. Boats and aircraft scanned the waters, hoping to find any sign of her. But as hours turned into days, hope began to fade. And then the questions started getting louder, because the more people heard Brian's story, the less sense it seemed to make. If Lynette was conscious and able to swim, as Brian suggested, why didn't she swim back to the boat? The dinghy wouldn't have drifted far once the engine stopped. We're talking about a relatively small distance, something that could have been closed quickly, especially by two people trying to reach each other. And if she couldn't swim, if she was struggling or unconscious, then why didn't Brian paddle toward her immediately? He had a boat. He had the means to reach her. So why didn't he? These aren't small inconsistencies. They strike at the very heart of his story. Then there's the issue of time. Brian didn't just delay going after Lynette. He also delayed telling others. It reportedly took nearly 24 hours before Lynette's daughter was informed about what had happened. And when that call finally came, something felt off. He sounded calm. Too calm. Not panicked, not frantic. Not like someone whose wife had just disappeared into the ocean hours earlier. Instead, his tone was described as steady, controlled, almost detached. For many people, that detail alone raised alarm bells, because grief, especially in moments like that, is rarely quiet. It's chaotic. But Brian's reaction didn't seem to match the situation. And as investigators began to piece together the timeline, more doubts began to surface. Could everything really have happened the way he said it did? Or was there something else, something he wasn't telling? Right in the middle of all this uncertainty, one thing became painfully clear. This was no longer just a missing persons case. It was becoming something much deeper, something far more complicated. And as the search continued, Lynette's family was left with more questions than answers. But before we go further, if you're drawn to real-life mysteries like this, stories that make you question everything you think you know, take a moment to subscribe to Midnight Casefiles. Like, comment, and share. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these stories coming. Because this one is only just beginning. As investigators dug deeper, they started looking beyond just Brian's account. They began examining the details he couldn't control. The physical evidence, the technology, the patterns. And what they were starting to uncover would make this case even more unsettling than anyone first imagined. As the hours turned into days, the ocean remained silent. No sign of Lynette. No calls for help. No debris. No confirmation. Nothing that could clearly explain what happened that night. The vast waters of the Bahamas had swallowed the only person who could tell the full story. And now everything depended on the one person who was still there to speak. Brian. But the deeper investigators looked, the more his story began to unravel. One of the most critical developments came from something most people would never think about: technology quietly tracking movements in the background. The yacht, the very one Lynette and Brian lived on, was equipped with something called an AIS system. It's designed to broadcast a vessel's location, movement, speed, and direction. In simple terms, it leaves a digital trail of where a boat has been. And according to emerging reports, that trail didn't quite match Brian's version of events. If his story was true, he should have been separated from the yacht, drifting in a powerless dinghy, struggling for hours to reach shore. But the AIS data suggested something else entirely. That the yacht itself may have been moving during the same window of time he claimed to be paddling alone. If that detail holds true, it changes everything, because it introduces a possibility that investigators can't ignore, that Brian may not have been where he said he was when he said he was there. And once doubt enters the timeline, every single piece of the story becomes questionable. Investigators also began trying to confirm the simplest parts of his account. Did they actually go to dinner that night? Were they seen at the restaurant? Did anyone witness them leaving together, getting into the dinghy, heading out into the water? Surprisingly, those details were not immediately confirmed. What should have been easy to verify, security cameras, eyewitnesses, marina footage, remained unclear, and that uncertainty created even more tension around the case. Because if the beginning of the story isn't solid, how can the rest of it be trusted? Meanwhile, Lynette's daughter began speaking out more openly. Her voice carried both grief and suspicion. She questioned the details that didn't make sense, pointing out things that didn't align with the man she had known growing up. She talked about the kill switch again, emphasizing how unusual it was for Lynette to have it. She spoke about their relationship, describing it as troubled in recent times, arguments, drinking, tension that had been building beneath the surface. And then came something even more disturbing. Allegations of past violence. According to her, there had been moments where Brian had been physically aggressive before. Claims that he had choked someone in the past. Threats that had been made. Patterns that, if true, painted a very different picture from the peaceful sailing life they had shown to the world. Now those claims alone don't prove what happened that night. But they add context. They shift perception. They make people look at the situation through a different lens. Because when a person disappears under suspicious circumstances, history matters. At the same time, experts began analyzing Brian's account from a practical standpoint. One diver and emergency response expert broke it down in simple terms, stripping away emotion and focusing purely on physics and behavior. If Lynette fell overboard and the kill switch was activated, the boat would have stopped almost immediately. That means she wouldn't have been far from the dinghy. Not hundreds of meters away. Not unreachable. Just a short distance. Close enough for him to paddle to her. Close enough for her to swim back. Even in rough water, both of them would have been moving with the same current. The idea that she would suddenly disappear beyond reach, while he was able to paddle for hours in the opposite direction, didn't add up. And then there's visibility. Brian claimed it was dark, that he couldn't see her. But if it was dark enough that he couldn't see Lynette, how was he able to navigate his way across open water for hours without getting lost or hitting obstacles? If he could see well enough to reach shore, shouldn't he have been able to see someone just a short distance away? These contradictions may seem small individually, but together they form a pattern that's hard to ignore. Still, there is another side to this story, the defense perspective. From a legal standpoint, suspicion is not proof. There are no eyewitnesses who saw what happened on that dinghy. There is no direct evidence showing that Brian harmed Lynette. Everything at this stage is circumstantial, a collection of inconsistencies, unanswered questions, and troubling details. A defense attorney would argue that accidents happen, that the ocean is unpredictable, that in moments of panic, people don't always act logically, that shock can make someone behave in ways that seem strange to others. And that's true. But here's the thing. When you put everything together, the timeline gaps, the delayed report, the calm demeanor, the questionable physical details, the possible contradiction from the AIS system, it creates a story that feels incomplete. Like something is missing. Like there's a piece of the puzzle that hasn't been revealed yet. As the search officially shifted from rescue to recovery, the tone of the case changed. Investigators were no longer looking for a survivor. They were searching for answers. And those answers may not lie in the water. They may lie in the moments before Lynette ever entered it. Was this truly a tragic accident in the middle of the ocean, a series of unfortunate events that spiraled out of control in seconds? Or did something happen on that boat? Something that turned a quiet night into a mystery that may never be fully explained. Right now, all we know is this. A woman is missing. A husband's story doesn't fully make sense. And somewhere between Hopetown and that yacht, something happened that changed everything. But before we close this case for now, if you want more deep dives into real-life mysteries like this, don't forget to subscribe to Midnight Casefiles, like, comment, and share. Your support helps bring these stories to light and keeps the search for truth alive. Because in cases like this, the truth doesn't just disappear. It waits, and sooner or later, it finds its way back to the surface.